So this is a lecture about debating the K. So I just want to go into the mechanics of a critique, what goes into a critique, and how you would be able to approach that in a debate round. So what is the K? A critique is something that attacks a like system or structure or like assumption that of the AF that is either ignored or not directly dealt with. A lot of times the K team will say that the 1AC not kind of engaging with that system or structure, that like oppressive system, is making that worse. And this basically happens to where the K team will say that this thing is bad and that the 1AC endorses it or allows it to happen. Uh, like a disadvantage, it has a link and an impact. Uniqueness is slightly different. We'll get into that a little later, but it doesn't really work like a disadvantage in that you have to prove that it's not happening now or that the impact hasn't happened. In fact, the whole point is that the impact has happened, and that the alternative is able to resolve that impact, and that impact manifests itself differently. For example, for like racism, uh, the impact may not be so much so that uh, like people of color are directly dying, but rather there's like a system of erasure, or what's called ontological violence, the violence against being of like the system of how things happen and their identity. So that violence occurs differently, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But this specifically, these impacts are going to be a lot different. So how is the K? You can view the K as a uniqueness counterplan and a disad. What I mean by that is that you have a disadvantage that's non-unique, and then you read a counterplan to make that disadvantage unique. So the critique is doing so in a way that has an alternative. So like we can solve this, and the affirmative is not solving this. Um, but it's not really unique in the sense that a disadvantage is. And you wouldn't want to say that like racism or homophobia is happening now, i.e., there's no reason to vote for the critique. First of all, because it's kind of problematic, but second of all, because strategically it doesn't make a lot of sense, considering that the alternative is then able to solve those issues. Especially because the assumption of saying, oh, racism is non-unique is that things that happen right now don't really matter. And then that's like also kind of problematic within that debate space. Um, Critiques exist a lot of times in like a non-material way, although sometimes it's less so like that. For example, like a capitalism critique, that is more like genuinely just like a counterpoint and as I said, because it doesn't really deal with like underlying assumptions or thoughts or oftentimes psychological tropes that we exhibit that is common for Afro-pessimism or for settler colonialism, that is dealt with specifically within that. They operate on the what's called epistemological level. So epistemology is the study of how you know. Basically, it is the reason why you think the way that you think. They are underlying assumptions or subconscious assumptions that frame the way that we think about things. For example, um, some people might have racist ideas, although not outwardly racist, like I don't like people of color, or I don't like, or I think those people are inferior to me, but rather they are more subtle, and those that epistemology is framed by you know, assumptions that we make or that education makes, that imposes upon us, or that our parents impose, or that their parents impose on them. And so those kinds of assumptions are very subtle and small, but have ripple effects to how we see policy. And that theoretical aspect is important for the critique in that those are the kinds of things that they're targeting. That epistemology is really important in the formation of a lot of critiques, and we can talk about that, how that like looks like later. Um, so why do you run a K? It allows you to talk about philosophy. A lot of people like that, me included. You can deal with social issues more, like racism, sexism, homophobia, etc. Uh, Strategically, you can become an expert at a specific strategy. So, for example, if you only read the CAP-K, um, then you would become an expert on anti-capitalism, socialism, etc., or communism for that matter. You become an expert at this specific strategy, and you know more than the other person. And a lot of times it's a lot more powerful in that way than like just like a disadvantage because you are centralizing your strategy to one specific way. It's not easy. I think a lot of people think that reading critiques is easy because you're able to sidestep the affirmative, but that's not really the case, especially because you have to deal with the affirmative just in a different manner, and there are a ton of different moving parts uh, to the argument itself, and it has various layers that like a disadvantage or a counterpoint doesn't, but it is also similar in that. Um, so how do you beat the critique? Uh, the permutation. So if you know anything about counterplans, you'll know that a permutation tests opportunity costs. It's essentially the same thing here. Sometimes the permutation is a little bit more nuanced in that it's not very obvious. You can't just say perm do both. You'd have to say perm do the plan through the mindset of the alternative, or perm do the plan and you know transition to socialism, etc. Um, the permutation is actually link defense, the critique, because it proves that the affirmative doesn't link as substantially as the uh, as the link would like you to believe. So if I read an AF and they read a cap K, uh, they will argue that capitalism is ingrained in how the affirmative operates and how the affirmative functions as like a solvent mechanism. And so the permutation says that it's actually not like that, and that the two are detached, and so you can permute the critique, and so you can make it so that you can do both at the same time. Solvency, I feel like this one's kind of self-explanatory. I mean, it's just how well the alternative is able to solve. Offense, so the you can argue the reasons as to why the ideas of the critique are wrong, i.e., for a capitalism critique, capitalism's good, socialism's bad, and the affirmative is good. So the for them to win, they have to prove why the affirmative is bad to some extent. Uh, and if you win that your AF is good, you are just weighing the plan versus the alternative, just like a counterpoint on a disad. If you prove the AF solves something that outweighs what the disad solves, then I mean you're basically winning, at least for the capitalism critique. And then the rest of the K is all fair game. So everything from the language that they use, like the individual words. For example, some people might use the word post memory. There are various ways, there are various theoretical framings that critiques use to articulate messages. Some of them might be problematic, others might just not be as adequate at like tackling specific issues. The authors, for example, Baudrillard is a author who writes about like reality, particularly simulations or the simulacra. He's a transphobe. There's also other things that are like an anthropocentrism critique that says that like the affirmative's focus on humans is like a main like source of life that's like more important to protect over animals is bad. Um, a very common author for that is Heidegger, who was a Nazi. Um, there are also various theories that can be run against the K, although you don't really want to do this if you're reading a policy AF. If you're reading a K AF, you can obviously debate your AF as a form of like an opposing theory or an opposing method to the critique. Um, I can talk more in depth about uh, KVK debates, but that's like a whole separate lecture because that's a lot more in depth. There are also three other things that are worth mentioning. Theory, uh, if the critique is conditional, um, if the critique contradicts the other things that they read. For example, if they read a capitalism critique and then they read an econ dissad, they're functionally arguing that the affirmative is bad because it crashes the economy. But for a capitalism critique, you're critiquing the system that the affirmative makes better, which is capitalism. So I think you can kind of see the issue there. Issues of fiat, so like utopian fiat, mindset fiat, uh, like object fiat, multi-actor fiat, durable fiat. Okay, the point is there are a variety of different ways to mm, uh, say that the ways that in which they're fiating the alternative is bad. You can also say that they shouldn't be able to fiat an alternative because it's just like a counter plan. The alternative specifically is like a different method to the affirmative, and so the theory that you can run against it is similar to a counterplan. For other critiques. This is where that KVK section kind of comes in. Common ones are like a queer theory versus settler colonialism, Afro-pessimism versus Afrofuturism, uh, just different competing methods. Um, and then framework. So this is important because you don't you don't necessarily only win the round based off of framework, but you do need it. You need to be able to weigh the AF against the K because a lot of Ks will say epistemology matters the most, but your AF is most of the time for policy AFs is centered or geared towards the ability to be a disadvantage. So some K teams, let's say you're debating a queerness K, they're going to say that the way in which you think about extinction events or think about like modern day policy events is bad, and so epistemology is that main focus. And if they win that, then you have no AF. It does not matter what you do. Like, it does not matter if you prevent extinction a million times over, because epistemology is that main focus. If they can win that, like, extinction is fake, or like thinking about extinction's bad, or the way that you brought up the affirmative is also bad, then you fundamentally don't have an affirmative. So you need to win framework the entire round. For debates like Cap K debates, it's not as important because um, you they're oftentimes not about epistemology. So Cap Ks are more about like material stuff like capitalism. Um, so that's kind of a like a less so of an example of epistemology, but there are other critiques that applies more to. That is, however, you should still win framework because sometimes capitalism critiques might focus on epistemology or like a pedagogical impact. What I mean by pedagogical is about pedagogy, and pedagogy is the practice of education. So they might say that anti-capitalist education is important to inject into debate, and that's why we should win. Like, no matter how our alternative functions, that it's like a good model of education. So all that being said, I think that we should look at a K file. So what I'm going to show you is a settler colonialism critique. Um, so the structure is kind of different than like some other ones that you might see because it is. a essentially it's like the sole argument that we would read on neg. So this is like the full thing. So you first you like describe the issue that's happening. This is what's called a theory of power, or like a theory of how power is constructed, in this case about colonialism. Um, this is this card also functions as a link. So um, it functions as something that is like important for uh like how intellectual property is maintained as a system and how it reinforces colonialism, or even is a version of colonialism. Um, this is like an impact card. This talks about erasure, elimination, and genocide, but more so like a theoretical genocide as opposed to a physical genocide. Uh, there are various different cards in here that serve different purposes. So, um, this like this is a another link, and also uh, kind of a further extension upon the impact. This is about extinction, um, as a like a settler tool, and like why extinction is bad. Uh, this is the alternative. And this is important because this highlights epistemology as one of the central parts of the alternative. It also talks about pedagogy. Um, this is a solvency advocate, similar like an affirmative. Uh, this is also kind of a solvency advocate, although different in that it's talking about the importance of education, and epistemology. Um, this also talks about that in a similar way. And these two last cards are about role of the ballot and education as a whole. A lot of teams will make an argument about the role of the debate, the importance of the debate, and the importance of them winning. So, in this instance, we advocate for a form of education that's anti colonial and that pedagogy is focused in that there is no other impact to debate other than the way in which we learn about education. Um, I'm not going to go super in depth here. I want to just go skip quickly to framework. Um, this is an example of framework. Sometimes there'll be a card here. Um, the this is talking about that we you can establish like an interpretation of the round, which is like that the 1AC as opposed to just the plan should be the object of study, and that the judge is an educator. So the role of the judge is to educate the best, and the role of the debate is determine our method of education. Um, this talks about the reason why, and then this talks about the importance of education and subjectivity. So that's an example of framework on the negative. Uh, and for to as a counter to that, um, this is an example of something that you would read if you're AF against the capitalism critique. This is super long because some people will read capitalism as like a strategy, like a one-off strategy, like I just showed you. So there's no other. They don't really talk about the affirmative in that way. So this is super long. So normally, if they just read it with like three other off, I wouldn't have that. But there's 21 responses here. Um, so this is your interpretation. So framework. The role of the ballot is to determine the best topical policy action. The affirmative should get to weigh the fiated implementation of the plan against a competitive alternative, and competitive is in reference to a permutation. The neg should be held accountable for concerns involving implementation. There's a refer or interpretation. This is talking about the importance of debate as like an activity of competition and fairness. So fairness kind of is a prerequisite to our education system. Um, and then it's the best benefit to anything in debate. So there we have permutations. Here's an example of theory. This is about utopian fiat. Um, the the rest of this is offense. Um, this is a reason why the AF is good. Uh, this is a double bind. This not to be confused with perm double bind. Uh, this this is a version of offense, which is just talking about why the affirmative is good and why the critique is bad. This again is about the political system. There's a offense. Um, this is all defense to the critique. So uh, they'll say that capitalism is a root cause of impacts that you have. So if they solve capitalism, then they solve the affirmative. This is important to be able to defend against. This is about representation or reps, and this is more so about epistemology. So this would say no, epistemology is not central to the way that we learn or think, and especially in debate, are the things that we read are not necessarily a reflection of um, the like the things that we believe in and the things that we learn. More offense to the alternative, uh, and yeah, I mean this is just about how capitalism's good, uh, like extinction, um, through like extinction that happens without the affirmative. So like the affirmative increases the economy, the increasing the economy is good for space colonization, otherwise it causes extinction. So yeah, if you have any questions, feel free to DM me on Discord or ask someone in the like the Discord server or something like that. Uh, Thank you.